Recording in progress.
Yeah, we all heard that, right?
Um,
So I
before
think that means now we're recording, but
Why
before
why
we
do you think that? Why do you think it means that?
it's gonna be fun, isn't it?
Fantasy, fantasy, fantasy fellas in your ears, in your ears.
I'm not sure if at the top of this I actually said what we're doing, so I'm going to do that now, and I might edit in ahead of time. But today we are doing our top 10 sci-fi and fantasy books each. Myself, I'll be doing mainly fantasy. I say mainly, all 10 are fantasy. Liam, by the sounds of it, is doing all 10 sci-fi, and we've got Tom to hopefully balance
Got
this
a
out.
I've got a bit of a 7-3 split. Could have
okay,
been 6-4. Could have been a 6-4, but in the end, just missed out.
Also, did we ever come up with a name for this podcast?
Me and Tom have been operating on fantasy fellas for a long time, but obviously now we're adding sci-fi in.
We go for the circle jerks.
Circle jerks. I'm not sure that's that's going to open us up
I,
to many demographics.
I, I can see the water cooler office conversation. What have you been listening to at the weekend? Well, three guys wanking each other off about books. Oh, Fantasy Fellows works, but
Yeah.
maybe there's a better name out there somewhere.
All right then. Welcome to the new episode of Fantasy Fellas with me, Alex, and Tom, who's over there. But
My name's Tom.
also,
My name's Tom.
cheers, Tom. First 3 seconds you talked over me. Cheers, man. But also, we've got a new participant to the situation, an ongoing situation, hopefully. We've got our other friend, Liam Turner. Liam, do you want to say a bit about yourself and what we're doing here today? Because I haven't yet.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alex. What a spectacular intro. So yeah, I'm Liam. It feels odd introducing myself to two people that I've known since I was in the womb. But I've always been into science fiction and fantasy, and particularly sci-fi. And in the past like 5 years or so, I've been embarking on a bit of a quest to find the best of the best in science fiction. Because in my opinion, like growing up, I grew up on Star Wars. I grew up on consuming media within like sci-fi from like visual media, and I think on reflection, now that I'm older, I've it's never really hit the mark. Like in my opinion, I think there's probably less than 10 truly great science fiction films ever made. In my opinion, I think
Wow.
the literary form is where sci-fi succeeds, or where sci-fi is its natural home. So I've kind of been on this mission of trying to dig into that world, completely immerse myself in it, and trying to find the best that the genre has to offer. So I've accumulated hundreds of books. You can see about probably 10% of them behind me in that search. And today I'm going to try and cut through all the fantasy bullshit that you two are going to talk about, and try and deliver my top 10 greatest science fiction books ever written, in my humble opinion.
Oh,
But
well,
does it mean there's no fantasy in yours then? Is that a
So,
spoiler?
so I consider fantasy, and like but for me, I've thought I'm not an expert on fantasy by any stretch. Like I've read Lord of the Rings like 3 times. I've read The Hobbit. I've read a couple of other like you lent me the Sword of Kaigan. I loved that. You lent me Jade Legacy and Jade War, I think it was.
Hmm.
Um, and but I'm just not an expert, so I figured that I'm best to probably stay in my lane.
fair, fair. Well, that sort of counterbalances me, who because I've got 10 fantasy books.
And I guess before we start, Alex, we should clarify that we did set some internal ground rules that we all stuck to fastidiously.
Yep.
And we definitely didn't have to be reminded of them 5 minutes before we actually started recording this
That'd be
podcast.
terrible.
100% no.
Obviously, that would be completely unprofessional and wouldn't look great, but that didn't apply to us. So our ground rules were one book per author or per series. So you're not going to see a list of like 10 Tchaikovsky novels or whatever.
Yeah, otherwise mine would just be pretty much all Abercrombie. And no one wants
Mere
to hear
Lynch.
about that. Yeah, one Lynch, nine Abercrombie, maybe something like that. But yeah, so as the new person to this podcast, how about you go firstly and kick us off with your number 10?
I will do just that, and I've taken Tom's lead in preparation for this and gathered these books so that I can show you the terrible, horrible, beaten up paperbacks that constitute the vast majority of my reading experience. And in fact, 1 second.
That just implies love. So, you know, if anything, that's better than it being just pristine and cold and unread.
It's just because I'm tight. I think I'd much rather pay 50p for a book that looks like it's been through a tornado than a whole £2 on a.
Well, it's all about finding them in the wild, isn't it? You want to find them in the wild.
Yeah,
Beauty.
I think that's the excuse that you tell people. When in reality, it's just because you're a tight bastard. But my number 10 pick, I think this will be maybe not controversial, is probably the wrong word, but hopefully a bit of like an bit of a wild card maybe, is The Genocides by Thomas M. Dish. This book was written in 1965, and it's one of the bleakest, quite possibly the bleakest dystopia, or the bleakest novel, full stop, that I've ever read. And Dish was a new wave science fiction author, and this was his first book. And since reading this probably 3 years ago, I've read a couple more because this book had such a big impact on me. And all his other works that I've read, I've found to be pretty much unreadable, like so bad that I've actually DNF'd them and not bothered. But the stars just aligned with this story, and it's stuck with me ever since. And I think the reason why this story is so compelling is I think of science fiction as, or should be, about exploring big ideas that other genre fic couldn't ever explore.
Sure.
So for me, the Genocides is all about the idea of the importance, or the lack thereof, the human race. Basically, it's about our importance against the scale of the universe. And it's basically a story about this small agricultural community in the American Midwest trying to survive the titular genocides. So this alien intelligence, which is orders of magnitude more technologically advanced, and we can infer probably orders of magnitude more intelligent than us, has stumbled across Earth. There's no attempt at first contact. There's no declaration of war, and there's most definitely no like flying saucers landing on the White House lawn. All we get is this really brief POV of these aliens, and they're just totally detached from the genocide that they're committing against all life on the planet. And effectively, they've stumbled across our planet, and they're using Earth as a farm. So they sow this incredibly invasive species that outcompetes all life on Earth, turning the whole planet into a crop to be harvested.
Right.
And in against that backdrop, humans, everything we've built, our civilization, our society, we are just the pests. We are we're the green flies that are eating away at that crop. And so you have this incredibly cold dystopia, and this incredible story of survival against odds that are really stacked against the protagonist of the story. And for me, that makes me think about how we as human beings look at life that we see as so far removed from us, right? So I think every person has like a certain level where you stop thinking about the impact your actions have on living things. So for example, insects, right? Insects are so far removed from us, it's really hard to empathize with them, right? If you don't ever feel sorry for an ant, right? So most people
Well, I do, but I'm great.
So most people are
You do
happy.
things to ants.
Most people are happy to just exterminate a nest of ants, right? If it's in your way, or if it's or a wasp's nest, right? If you have a wasp nest in your house, you don't think about the feelings of the wasps. You don't think about the civilization that they've built in your loft. You just think, get that out of my loft. I want them gone, and you poison them all, right? This takes that same idea of life being so many steps removed from your level that it almost ceases to have any relevance or to have any agency. And the extermination of the human race in this book is just utterly bleak. I think the body count in this book, there's about 250 people in this community at the beginning of the book, and it's only about 250 pages. And I think of those 250, only 2 survive, which is not a spoiler in any way, shape, or form, because this happens within like the first 8 pages. Half the people are gone. And against this backdrop, you've still got this human depravity, you've still got power struggles, and you've still got revenge burning amongst the very last scraps of humanity. It's it's pathetic in terms of looking at our place within the universe. Extremely bleak, and just very, even still now, 3 years on, it's just so vivid in my mind, which in my opinion is the mark of an amazing story. So that's the Genocides. That's my number 10.
Cool. Well, I'm now
Very
a little
different.
bit concerned about the level of my what I'm going to say about some of my books. I might just say I quite liked it.
Have you ever come across an author, either of you, apart from that, where you've liked one book so much and then literally hated everything else? Because that's quite weird. It's quite odd, isn't it, to
Yeah.
be to that extent?
Do you know what? I actually thought like that could be like a one-hit wonders. It could be an idea for a
Yeah.
future episode, right? Because they're definitely out there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I've tried. Have you read? You guys both read Ender's Game?
Yeah.
No,
So-
I've seen the film.
I
Doesn't
read the
count.
second one and it wasn't as good.
So I've read Ender's Game, loved it. In fact, I think one of them is right there. But I found all the other stuff by Orson Scott Card to be not like Dish, where it's unreadably bad, but just never up to that standard. I'd probably say same with maybe like Dan Simmons, like Hyperion, amazing.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I tried to read The Terror and
Just
also
wasn't that good.
Carry On Comfort, and they were both pretty meh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think it's hopefully you'd hope it's a rare breed, right? You'd hope that authors that strike, you shouldn't be able to just by luck write a book that good and then the rest of your output is that dog shit. But
I don't know if you've read Ready Player 2 and Armada, then Ready Player 1 was definitely a one hit as well.
yeah, I have heard that, to be fair.
Sometimes if someone takes like 10 years to get published and they put all that time into a story and like going back and reworking it and take loads of editorial advice on, and they come up with something incredible, but then they get on a schedule where they're told to write 2 books a year and the rest
True.
is just crap.
Yeah.
It's garbage.
Yeah, so that can sometimes happen. I think that's happened with a couple of the fantasy people I've read, but yeah, well, thanks for that, Leon. That was incredibly detailed.
Be interested in. I'm making a note of any ones I fancy reading myself. I think I'm going to add that on to it.
Yeah, if you want to borrow my copy of the Genocide, you're more than welcome to. It's a horrible little book, but well worth reading. Well worth reading.
I like that you kicked off the 10 and thus the episode with that book, because that's set the tone really well for what we're talking about. Tom, do you want to? Can you go any further bleak than the Genocides?
No, definitely not bleak. And no. My number 10 is third book in the trilogy, and it has the rarest of all things. Third book is the best in this series, and it sticks the landing. And when you read fantasy, especially, you know how rare that is. The amount of times the first book's the best, and then it goes downhill from there. It's pretty rare. So it's She Who Waits by Daniel Polanski. So it's part of the Lowtown series. And it's the type of fantasy that I really enjoy. And I've read a few series like this where the whole series is self-contained inside one town. So all 3 books, you don't ever leave the Lowtown city. And you follow one character called the Warden. And the Warden is an ex-war hero, but he was also the sort of right-hand man to what is essentially, for the purpose of this, the king of Lowtown. When he comes back from the war with Bleak, and over the 3 books, you get like all the background of that. He's lost all of his power, so he like ran the city, and he no longer does. So it's got a bit of a Peaky Blinders vibe, but it came out for Peaky Blinders. So, the reason why I really like this one is that the main character, the Warden, we really get to kind of see his whole life. So we get to see him as a child, we get to see what he was like in the war. But the city itself is like a character. The Lowtown itself is the way Blansky brings it to life is pretty bleak, really bleak actually. One of the bleakest books, not the extent of what you've just talked about, but it's really bleak. Yeah. And what I really like about this one, and I've told you to read the series a few times, Alex, is that without giving too much away, is that in the first and second book, it's all about the Warden trying to take the city back. It's really low fantasies. There is a bit of magic in there, but nothing massive. In the third book, you come to the conclusion pretty early on that there's no way he'll get it back, and it then turns into him trying to escape, which is, and he's taking he's got the love of his life there, who it turns out but is also the person that's trying to kill him. And again, it ends with real closure for all the characters, which is it's about 6 or 7 characters, but it's one POV fantasy. So it's amazing how he does it, that you kind of closure for everybody, but you don't actually see it from anyone's point of view but the Warden. And then the war itself, that happened 20 years before the book, kind of like a side plot that you kind of can follow. And the more you learn about the war, the more you understand why Lowtown is as it is. Um, it came out of nowhere, to be fair. I got this trilogy. The first two were pretty good, and then this one was just blew me away. I remember reading it when I was on holiday, and I finished it, and it actually, I was like, I can't read another series for a good week or so. I just read a load of standalones because it was just the way it closed down was just perfect. Um, so yeah, I mean, Lowtown series, third book, She Who Waits, my number 10, and definitely recommend it to anybody looking for fantasy that has quite low, more gritty than high level magic. Yeah, that's number 10.
I love the idea of like the city being a character, and especially the self-contained, like the very constrained nature of that kind of story. That to me, and obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but to me, when I think about the difference between sci-fi and fantasy, sci-fi is about ideas. Maybe characters get left to the side. There's
Sorry.
that's all right. Like, maybe characters don't get as much development in sci-fi. It's more about those ideas. The story you've just described sounds to me like the opposite of that. Like you're in one space and you develop
Yeah.
over the course of that trilogy.
What I like about it is you've got two things. So you get like a character in this one, it's like a character study of the warden, and then like a character study of the city. But then you've got others like this, and just finished Full Hope, which is the second book in the series, similar sort of thing. It's got 5 or 6 point of view characters, but again, it's like a deep dive into them. So yeah, I think character. I think the more I read fantasy, like the more I'm into the character. The action can take or leave. To be honest
Yeah.
with you, if you got good character study, I think that comes from reading like lots of Stephen King and like things like that. So but yeah, it's a really good one, and it's easy. It's only about 350 pages. Yeah, 387 pages, so it's nothing massive. So it's again, you've got a whole trilogy that's shorter than one Wheel of Time book.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether I wanted to bring this up at some point, and you've just brought it up now, Tom. Like battle or action scenes within fantasy and science fiction. I remember reading Lord of the Rings as a kid, and Tolkien's approach to battles is kind of like, and then they had a fight. And then there's like an 8 chapters of them crying about the fight that they just had, but you get none of the action. And obviously, Peter Jackson comes and makes action the focal point, which makes sense, different medium. But and at the time as a kid, I remember being like, well, I need like 17 pages of Gimli chopping off orcs' heads. But do you find that, now that you're no longer 15, like you said, Tom, the action, you can kind of just take it or leave it?
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, 100%. I think the action it's almost kind of you get through it. It serves a purpose to kind of confirm where the characters are. Kind of how I see it for the most part.
I think
That's
it's
why I
hard
find
to
it
do.
it's hard as well because you've got with fantasy especially, and I think one of the Brandon Sanderson books, you can have like an action sequence. It's like I think one chapter in like the third Stormlight, which is like 220 pages, just one chapter, and it's like a one battle. Really hard to stay involved in that sort of thing. I think.
I don't think books as a form are suited to action, personally.
No,
If you get
just
someone,
bleak death.
if you get someone who does it really well, then it kind of works. But I gotta agree. The older I get, sometimes I just find myself completely tuning off, trying to get through action phases of books. I just sort of don't care. I just want the plot to move along, and I kind of want someone like Tolkien to come along and go, then they'd a fight. Anyway, the aftermath of that is this, and then carry on from there. But I know you've told me to read that a few times, Tom, and I because of my liking of sort of less high fantasy and sort of urban fantasy where the city's a bit more involved, like Lemoore. But that will come up later, so I'll leave that to then. My number 10, and I'm hoping that I'm going to benefit from both of you. If not having read all of my books that I've got here, at least being very aware of them. My number 10 is Northern Lights, His Dark Materials, the wider series by Philip Pullman. Tom's already shaking his head.
No, brilliant.
All right,
I absolutely love that series. Absolutely love that series.
Yeah, it's a great series. It's very much not of its time. It's kind of the time I read it as well, because I was pretty much the same age as Will and Lyra. Because we were kids when it came out, and it's one of the first introductions.
You Will and Lyra.
Me, Will and Lyra. Well, the character age is about 11, 12. I think that's about 11, 12. And yeah, it was one of the first introductions I had to fantasy. And And yeah, I just remember it being really interesting to just have this world which is kind of like ours, but not. So I guess it's like kind of augmented reality fantasy. Well, there's probably a subgenre of that, but like, you know, it's set in Oxford, but some things are the same, some things are different. My life love of airships was probably born out of
I was
that
thinking when
book.
you said it.
You do constantly talk about airships.
I'm down the pub just sinking pints talking about airships.
I can't think of a single time when you've not brought up massive airships in everyday conversation.
It just makes me sad that we still do ferries and don't airships. But anyway, sorry, go on.
So His Dark Materials, I haven't read the series. I think it was adapted really badly onto TV at some point, right?
There was a TV series that finished a couple of either last year or a couple of years ago. I watched it. I thought it was all right.
It was the film. It was the film that was adapted badly. So they made the Golden Compass, which is the Northern Lights, and that was terrible. But I haven't seen the TV series, but I've heard that that's quite good actually.
So as someone that's never read His Dark Materials and has only seen the terrible, terrible film, what would you say to me to why should I read it?
Why should you read it? Because it's really good. Well, go on, Sam. Try to help me out this hole.
I think for me personally, it's like I saw it as kind of the link between sort of Harry Potter and then more adult books. It kind of sat in the middle for me, and like Alex said, you've got the real world, and then you've got the other world. And the demons. So the big selling point for me is every person has a demon. So every person has like an animal that follows them everywhere, and it kind of reflects their personality. No, but it reflects their personality. It links to them. And again, from what I remember, I think this is always what I'm looking for. It sticks the landing. I remember the third book being brilliant. I remember the ending being fantastic. And also, there's been subsequent books set there. I read Book of Bliss, I think it was a few years ago, to come back, and it's set at the same timeline as the trilogy, but with different characters, and they overlap with the characters from the first trilogy. I would definitely recommend, and it's an easy read. I definitely recommend it even now. It's not really aimed at our ages. Sorry, Alex, it's your book. This is. I'm terrible.
No,
but I just think I generally, when you said it, I remember reading that and I absolutely loved that book.
Thanks for jumping in, because my love of it basically boils down to, I thought the armored polar bear is really cool. I like the fact that they have airships and they go everywhere. Also, when they're not in an airship, they go by canal boat, and they're my two favorite modes of transport. Probably because of the book, because I was about 11 and it shaped my life rather than I liked it afterwards. But just thought it's very anti-establishment, and it's it is basically very atheist, and I think they were sort of the ideas I was exploring at that age as well. For the first time, probably didn't realize quite how much they were going in.
At 11.
That's what I mean. I didn't probably realize how much. I wasn't going like, "Oh, that really resonates with me." I was probably reading it and going, "That's why I'm atheist now," because there's a big analogy of the Catholic Church, the magisterium, and they're very evil.
It came out in 1995. Sorry, 1995 came out. It's mad.
It's interesting, Alex, that you say that shaped your personality, and you now work for the government. It's very, very anti-establishment.
I bloody hate the government. No.
And you're part-time priest as well, aren't you?
Yeah, and you interesting. You drive a car, not an airship. Which, if you ask me, it's just hypocrisy. But
I've never said I'm not a massive hypocrite. Yes, that's my number 10. Good series, good book. Liam, back to you for number 9.
Okay, so number 9 is a book called The World Inside by Robert Silverberg, which was written in 1971. Silverberg, an absolutely prolific science fiction writer, and somebody that, if we didn't have our stipulations that we put before we did this list, I probably could have a top 10 Silverberg and quite easily fill every single slot.
Right.
The World Inside is an absolutely bonkers novel about another dystopian society, and this one is one where entire societies live within a single building. So they're called urban monads. They're these 1,000 floored towers with 800,000 people living quite literally on top of one another. And these dot the entire planet, and it's a society that has become almost religiously obsessed with reproduction and with adding more and more people to the human race. And a consequence of this environment where you have 800,000 people crammed into this extremely claustrophobic environment is that it's extremely sexually liberated, and sex, seeing as it's a force of procreation, which is held in in a religious light in this society, means that sex basically is part of the religion, and they've selectively bred the humans who live in these towers to weed out discontent. And like the children develop super rapidly, like they're sexually mature by like the age of 10, and they have multiple children before they're out of their teenage years, and they have like 15-20 children is not just common, it's like normal. And so and essentially as a society, even though they still have like male and female couples, anyone can have sex with anyone they want. And a big part of this system is something called night walking, where every night the men of these Erdmons will leave their apartment, go walking, and essentially have sex with whoever they want, whilst the women wait at home and receive.
Be walked in on.
Yeah, whoever comes knocking, right? So it's an exploration of the idea of a sexually liberated society taken to the nth degree, right? And the reason I love this story so much and why it resonated with me so much is it builds this dystopia, but it makes you question sometimes, as I think good dystopia should. This seems to work. Is this such a bad thing? It's clearly an insane idea. It's clearly so separate from what we deem as normal. But especially at the beginning of the book, you start to think to yourself, this seems like it's got legs. Like I could go and live in an Urban tomorrow and be one of these 800,000 people. But what Silverberg does like masterfully is takes a vertical slice of this entire strata of this civilization, and we get 3 POV characters, one of whom lives at the very top of the tower, which is corresponded with the class system. He's like a rising star of the administration, and eventually he's probably going to rule the whole Erdmon in future, but he's very disillusioned with his position. There's an artist who lives around the middle of the tower who is a performer in this kind of like psychedelic orchestra, which I can't do justice to, but really needs to be read to be believed. And then there's this engineer who is just like a lowly maintenance guy. He lives right on the lower floors, and he's extremely disillusioned with his life and with a desire to want to get outside and see the world outside. And through the exploration of these different levels through the strata of the civilization of the society, we get to see that even in what could be called like a dystopian utopia, which I realize is a contradiction, every problem that this Erdmon solves or seems to solve, it just creates another in its place. And that's best exemplified in the story of this young hotshot. It's a man who's destined for greatness. He's got the burden of expectation on his head. Everyone thinks he's going to ascend and be this, ascend to a position of great power and status. And Silverberg's writing of the way that impacts him and the way that affects his behavior and the toll that takes on his personality is just absolutely astonishing. So yeah, that's my number 9. That's The World Inside by Robert Silverberg.
Cool. There's a few things. When did that come out?
1971.
So there's a few books I wonder whether or not that's influenced or been influenced by, because
High Rise.
I'm thinking High Rise. Yeah.
I've
read that.
High Rise almost made my list, but sorry, what
I love High Rise.
Thinking, Alex?
I was so something that might have influenced it. Brave New World with the sexual liberation sort of thing, the orgy porgy or whatever that was called in there. The fact that they were all very just, sex is something to be, encouraged and done by everyone, or not that sex isn't encouraged generally, but as a sort of way to opiate to the masses kind of thing.
Yeah, like a pacifying pacifying force, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting idea because if it's a bit like if you give someone everything that they need, all the food they want, all the drink they could ever have, if you meet everyone's needs, what motivations do they have to do anything? And therefore, what motivation do they have to rebel, or what motivation do they have to question the status quo, right? Interesting you mentioned Brave New World. That may or may not come up later in the show.
Okay, I won't go into Huxley's. Because you're about to go into it, I think, and it's probably the juxtaposition between Huxley's view on how to control a society and George Orwell's. I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but George Orwell was scared that we'd be controlled, and Aldous Huxley was scared that we'd just have everything we wanted and wouldn't do anything because of that.
It's almost like I told you that that was going to come up later, Alex, because that's exactly what I want to talk about. Yeah.
Well, then I'll leave it to that. But what else was I going to say?
I've got anything to say about his own books, but then he just books all over your books.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a discussion, Tom, and as you came in very early on my number 10.
It reminds me of so I was just going to bump in. There's a fantasy book I've read called Senna Ascends,
which
is from the last 10 years, which is very much set in like an alternative world where Motorworld's knackered and everyone lives in these giant, like, it's like a tower, and there's levels, and the tower's big enough to have like 20 million people in it, and the higher you get, it's like the same thing. So yeah, it's obviously it's inspired all sorts of stuff.
Isn't that kind of the idea with Red Rising as well?
Sort of. Kind of expands
so much.
You've never lived, mate. I tell you. You think you'll probably be annoyed with me later on.
I'm looking forward to featuring in numerous lists.
And on that note, Tom, is
number 9.
Yes, it is Tom next. Yeah.
So this is my first sci-fi actually, and it's really relatively recent. And it's Recursion by Blake Crouch.
Yep.
If you read it, Leon.
I haven't read it yet.
No, so it's a basically time travel. You've got 2 protagonists. You've got a lady called Helen and a guy called Bill. And Helen basically created the concept of time travel, working for a conglomerate company, like a huge company. And the company always want to monetize time travel. And in the timeline that we start, once it's kind of been announced that this is a thing, people start having what they dub false memory syndrome. So they're almost getting memories of it being like input into their minds, because their past is changing and the world's changing. And you end up in a position where you've got Helen and I think they're trying to kind of go back in time to stop it happening, and then they have to go back and further. And so those are different timelines where they're trying to kind of change what's happened, but Helen at the same time kind of wants kind of, she fights herself because part of it's like the greatest thing that she's the high top of her profession. It's the greatest thing she could ever do. They fall in love, and then but when they time travel, they forget each other, and then they overlap and meet each other. And there's a guy called Slade who owns the company that have kind of it's imagine if Apple time travel essentially. Slade basically, it's in his best interests that this continues, and in every timeline, doesn't matter what they do or what they find, Slade's approach doesn't change. Again, I think I'm really bad. I don't know if you're the same. I think you're probably not, Leon, because of your detail, Alex. I'm really bad at remembering everything in these books. I do remember though that the different timelines and the way the world changed, which it really went to goes to the nth degree. So it's kind of mental, some of the stuff that happens. And I just remember it was kind of one of those books where it's kind of a thriller. And for me with sci-fi, and I'm not a massive sci-fi fan, what I like with sci-fi for the most part is when you can kind of read it and because you don't understand it completely, it could make you think, could that happen? Like, is there if we see that that's what we would do if we had time travel, we would do exactly what happens here. So yeah, I loved it. Found it be easy read, straightforward, but also something that I could really kind of engage with. And I think sometimes for me, I struggle with sci-fi that's too complex. The big ideas don't really work for me. So for this one, it was like a bit of a thriller at the same time. He reminds me, I don't know if you've ever read Blake Crouch, but he's basically Michael Crichton for our generation. He can kind of bring it to life. I don't know if you've read Wayward Pines or watched Wayward Pines. Have you heard of Wayward Pines?
I have heard of it, yeah.
So he wrote that trilogy, which is brilliant. I nearly put that in there. And again, it's just kind of really accessible if you kind of get into sci-fi, but really, really enjoyable. So yeah, I loved it. And to be fair, every book I read by him is a banger. Um, yeah, so Recursion.
Sounds good. I haven't read any Blake Crouch, and I think time travel is like a really untapped. There's a lot of untapped potential within it because it is so mind blowing. I think only a book can dig into a subject like that. Like TV shows that do time travel. I don't know if you guys have watched like Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think they can do it some justice, but you need that longer format to really dive into
I like
something that complex.
I like the fact that they do what we would do. Sounds stupid, but like you think, yeah, I would put if I could time travel, I'd go back to 1998 and I'd get my dad to put 20 grand on Beckham to get sent off. It sounds stupid, but like that sort of stuff like is in the books, like really like relatable things. So yeah, yeah. I would
Nice.
recommend Liam if you've not read Blake Crouch, I'd 100% recommend.
I'll,
You're
I'll
gonna
add it
go
to the list.
anything really that he's written. Dark Matter, Recursion, Grade, all good stuff.
How mind bending is it? Because I've watched certain things like the film Primer, which is something I come back to once every 4 or 5 years, just to
Great
sort of masochistically put myself through it again. Because I spend it's only about 80 minutes long, and I spend about 800 minutes googling it, which I do to a lot of films. But I just go down an absolute rabbit hole of trying to work out what the heck has gone on.
I think the beauty of it is it's not that it's really he's somehow managed to break into his books are sci-fi and there's loads of big ideas and there's a complexity to it, but they're also really accessible. Like if you go onto like Goodreads, like he's got like 150, 300,000 reviews, and for sci-fi nowadays, like it's hard to break that audience when you're sticking to it. So the way he writes is like I said, I'd encourage you to read anything just to see what you think because it's an easy read. Like, I think I read that one in. Generally, think I might have read that in one sitting. It's like 300 pages. I think I just loved it
It's madness, just
before I had
separately.
before I had our better and Nicole might be at work, but yeah,
For a week.
for a week, yeah. So yeah, definitely worth reading.
Fair
Nice.
enough. Good stuff. Good stuff. Right. So back to me. As I've said at the top, mine is all fantasy, so you won't be surprised it's fantasy. Oh, Tom might give me a bit of stick for this. I have put in my top 10 fantasy books of all time.
You sound like you're questioning yourself.
A little bit. I am a little bit. Well, I realized when I was going through this that how many like repeat authors I've got in my top like 50 books. But so then do one author per place really opened it up to other people. So I've gone for The Black Prism, which is the first book, I think. And, he's already laughing.
You've slated. I've been with you, and you've slated that.
No, I've not slated that book. That individual book. The first three, I think the first three are genuinely very good books.
Yeah.
And then it goes so far south.
Yeah.
But Liam, I don't know if you're aware of this book at all or this series, but it's a guy called Brent Weeks, and it was the second sort of big series he'd done after a very sort of promising start on the first series, but completely different series, completely different world building. The world building is really, really good. It's about sort of like people who do magic with light, and it's if certain lights mean different powers and different character traits, and all is very complicated, but he explains it really well in the first book. And if you're trying to get across all that world building, you have to sort of do a pretty good job to get everyone on board and tell a story. And then so he's doing all that, some action's happening, and it's actually genuinely quite good action because the sort of magic how it works actually is quite conducive to sort of doing a lot of action scenes and a lot of sort of big set piece stuff. And then after that, he just sort of throws in the backstory. And then about halfway to 2/3 of the way through, you've got a huge, I don't think this is a massive spoiler, but you've got a huge twist. And it's like, wow, he's just sort of dropped a bomb on me there towards the end of this book. And if you look at that book in a kind of microcosm, it does sort of have everything, and it's really, really easy to read prose as well. You can just like get through that sort of stuff. And it's just a really lot of fun. And it's the main character's it's kind of like a, young adult-esque, because it's someone who, it's a bit like Harry Potter. They didn't think these people who can draft light, it's called, are like almost semi-gods, and everyone else is normal. And he didn't think he was going to be that, and then he finds out he can, and there's the school that can teach him how to do it and all that. So it's there's
School tropes are the best. Like when
yeah.
they are good. They are good.
That does remind me a little bit of the fantasy book that Tom lent me, Sword of Kaigan, which is about like these elemental people that have this control over an elemental magic system, and everyone that can't, there's this underclass of normal humans that don't have access to it, and this kid goes to school and shenanigans ensue.
It's a trope for a reason. Lots of people
it works.
taps into it. Yeah. And
did I hear you say that there's 6 books in the series, but the first 3 are great, and then it just drops off a cliff?
Yeah, it's either 5 or 6, but yeah, it really does. To the point where I didn't really even see it happening, because I thought, it's going quite well. He's expanding it in the second and third one. You're going towards a big sort of crescendo, and lots of things were happening. There's actually quite a lot of sort of political intrigue as well, because there's like a main capital city, and there's one person who's supposed to rule it, and lots of things happen with that. But it just completely went off a cliff. The main characters were sent across the world from each other for very little reasons. And there was a thing that I think was happening in the author's life that he just shoehorned into the book for about 900 pages to do with sex, and it was kind of weird. And people might have that condition, and fine, they want to raise awareness, but I don't think you should just completely derail your fantasy series to talk about it for 400 pages. Tom, thoughts?
I agree. The first book is brilliant, and the magic system's really interesting, and it's very, you can imagine it being like a TV series, because every like 10, 15 chapters something crazy happens, and you've got a big twist. When you get to book 4, about a quarter of the way through it, you can't actually believe that there's going to be a 5th book, because it's just you can't believe it. And
it's that bad.
Yeah, it really is. It's a shame actually, and I never finished it. You finished it, didn't you? I gave up on it.
I did.
I can't believe I read 4, and they're these big boys, these like 800-900-page books, and I didn't finish it. I was like, I can't do it. But I think you self-harmed your way to the end, didn't you?
Yeah, I think I summarized it by saying I think you had the better idea of not finishing it, because just try and remember the first few books, what they were, promising start, and then don't go through with it, because I just felt like I had to, because of just sort of a bit of a completionist once I put some effort in, but it was just a sort of lost cause really, and one of those lost value fallacy things, and I was just shouldn't have bothered putting the time in. But for the first couple of books, like I said, there was a twist, and then it twisted back, and it was kind of verging on unbelievable, but still very entertaining. And then it just became neither. So that's kind of when I lost all sort of faith with it. But anyway, that's my number 9. So round we go towards 8 with Liam.
Sure thing. So I realised that for my number 9, I forgot to flash the book. So I need to. It took me a good 25 minutes to find these all. So I'm going to cash in on that as much as I can.
Yeah, don't waste that effort.
My number 9 is Blood Music by Greg Bear. It's a standalone novel from, I want to say I think around about the 1980s. And it's 1983. And Blood Music, the way I would summarize it, my one-liner would be, it's the ultimate in science fiction body horror. And so it's somewhat reminiscent of the movie The Thing, but taken to a whole new level. And the central idea behind Blood Music is the protagonist is this lazy, somewhat troubled scientist that stumbles upon this literally earth-changing discovery, and he basically cultures sentient cells. So he creates in his lab cells that are capable of decision making, of logic, of learning, and of collaboration, and also of assimilating non-sentient cells into their rank. And just from that brief description, you could probably imagine where this goes. So he gets exposed for this extremely morally dubious and dangerous work, loses his job, and in this act of extreme, like, recklessness, he injects the cells into himself. And the body horror that follows is just like the Thing dialed up to a whole nother level. And I think there's just like a really abject anxiety about the fact that you can inject yourself with something, or you can make a decision, you can carry out an action, and from the point of you doing that, you have to live with the consequences, whether they are immediate or whether it's something that's going to happen in a year's time or in 10 years time, right? And I was thinking about examples when I was thinking about the kind of anxiety this brought up in me. I'm sure we've all read those stories that you see occasionally in the newspaper about like a drug mule who, it gets paid $5,000 to swallow a package of some Class A substance and take it across the Atlantic, and it ruptures, and they have an enormous overdose, and they die in agony somewhere, over the Atlantic Ocean. And that, to me, like, there's such a exquisite like terror in the idea that you can make that decision, and once you've done it, once you've made that call, once you've injected yourself, whatever it is, from that point on, you're a prisoner of fate, right? What happens to you is just a matter of time, and there's nothing you can do in the interim. And Greg Bear really like ratchets up that idea that this guy has made a rash decision and he is going to regret it, which is a severe understatement. And these sentient cells, they eventually reach a kind of singularity. They move beyond just infecting him. They get into the water supply, and by the close of the book, whole cities across North America are subsumed by this titular blood music, and whole cities are draped in this kind of like living skin. It's disgusting. It's evocative. It's bleak, which might be a theme, and all of this is done by this like hive mind intelligence that has the curiosity of a child, but with the power of a god, and it's still trying to figure out its place in the world, and figure out and making mistakes along the way, and figure out what it's there to do. So yeah, blood music. If you like science fiction horror, or if you like horror in general, especially like that kind of body horror, that's that horror that gets under your skin. And reading this book, I read it on holiday. It's really not a holiday read.
Were you like by a pool or something?
I was by the pool, and every time it got too much for me, I just jump in the pool, because it makes you feel like you need a shower every couple of chapters. But
for those just joining us, we're not talking. We're not becoming an anti-vax group. It's just a book.
Is it quite?
Yeah.
I only asked this because before, I can't remember what book it was. It was before I had Goodreads, so I can't remember. But I have read a Greg Bear book before. I can't remember much about it. I don't know what it's called, but I remember it was accessible, I'd say. Is it more accessible, that book, than maybe some of the older? So the other two you mentioned, I'd imagine I'd struggle more with them. But is it a little bit more accessible, would you say, or is it not?
Yeah,
for someone, yeah.
To my mind, Greg Bear is like kind of like Hollywood science fiction. Like his other books that I've read are all like he does a lot of disaster stuff. So it's kind of a running joke inside sci-fi that at the end of every Greg Bear book, the world explodes. he doesn't quite know how to do stakes that don't get extremely large.
Nice.
But it's very crowd pleasing, very easy to read. Like there's some science in there, and there are actually a few words that I had to Google the meaning of, because it talks a lot about DNA and about like biology in quite some detail. But once that stuff's out of the way and it gets into this chaos that these cells unleash, it's more like kind of popcorn sci-fi, I would say. And that's, I don't mean that to be pejorative in any way, shape, or form.
So that sort of evocative nature of it, do you enjoy that then? Because anything that's remotely horror or makes me feel weird, I just wouldn't be a fan of.
So like I say, that anxiety, I don't enjoy it. Well, maybe I'm a masochist, although you describe yourself as a masochist.
Oh yeah, different kind maybe.
I think you read books, this is going to sound pretentious, you read books to feel things, right?
Sure.
So whether that's satisfaction about feeling, that a story has been well told, or whether that's feeling that you have a different take on a subject that you would never have before. And in horror, you want to feel you want to feel maybe fear is the wrong word. I don't think I've ever read a book and been like, shit, thinking the next word is gonna make me jump out of my skin. Instead, it's like that, it's that dread or that anxiety. You know, with books, it's a different kind of, in my experience anyway, it's a different kind of
Yeah.
feeling. And for me, that what I got from Blood Music was mostly revulsion.
Fair enough. I mainly engage with media to have my own thoughts just repeated back at me in a kind of confirmation bias cycle. But, yeah, that's probably a more brave and probably more fulfilling way to have, you know, to look at art and stuff. But
I get that. I read horror a bit, and there's been some where I'm like, oh, it's absolutely grim. But
Yeah.
also, like, I read one called The Troop recently, and there's like they're like scouts in America, and they end up on an island, and there's these like slugs that end up going inside them, and then it's grim, but just really good at the same time. And yeah, so I can completely get that why
fair
you would do
dues.
that. Yeah, cool.
The only time I was anything like that, I read, it's not sci-fi. I read The Wasp Factory by
Oh yeah, Ian
a guy
Yeah,
who,
I've read that. Yeah,
yeah, who is a sci-fi author, and it
Yeah,
was ironically the story was he wrote Wasp Factory out of kind of like just to get published because, and almost out of frustration with that he couldn't get his sci-fi series published, so he went, what do you want? I'm going to get the weirdest, most screwed up
Yeah.
book possible. And then he came up with The Wasp Factory, and I read that on holiday myself in Lisbon, and I was just like, put it down, like, just like, oh, no, oh, he's doing horrible things to these wasps, and other horrible things
Yeah.
are happening. And
Yeah, so somebody gave me a copy of the Wasp Factory once, and I'm reliably informed that the guy that gave me the copy to lend me the copy, he like makes sculptures out of skulls and out of like bones of animals that he finds. And putting two and two together did not surprise me in the slightest once I read that book.
yeah, I'd be careful around him. Tom, I think we're on to your number 8.
Number 8.
Yes, my way is probably the first of the big boys. And I was
Low as
when I was
8.
making when I was making my list, I was conscious that try not to. You're probably not going to pick when I say this, Alex. Try not to think about where a series has gone. But at the same time, it's really hard. And obviously, you've just said the Blackphism, and I think you might have had that higher if the series itself had been ended well, potentially. So my number 8 is Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So this is an
That is a
absolute
big
monster.
book.
That is
Jesus.
that's a 940 page book. So I mean, just for your, I mean, Alex has read this, but for your benefit, Liam, this is Brandon Sanderson. This is his Magnus Opus. This is his he sets 90% of his book. Well, it used to be 90%, now it's about 60 because he just keeps writing shit. But he sets a lot of his books in a world called Cosmere. And there's been multiple series, but Stormlight Archive, of which this is the first book, The Way of Kings, links that all together in theory. Now where that series has gone, where those books have gone is a conversation for a different podcast. But this book in itself, you get introduced to the world of Russia. You get introduced to some absolutely epic characters. Kaladin being the one that comes to mind straight away. You get 2 different timelines. So you've got your current timeline, and you've also got backstory of can't remember whose backstory this one is. I think this one might have been Balinar's. I can't remember exactly. You get a backstory of a character, goes sort of, concurrently to the main characters. There's so much going on here. It's really hard to kind of do it any justice because of the size of the book. But we essentially get an idea that there's these they're almost like gods, the Knights Radiant, and they have like these shard blades, shard plate armor, and when we kind of get to Russia, that's just gone. It's just not a thing anymore. And Kaladin has that sort of epic fantasy. He starts with something, gets reduced to nothing, and then he rises up, and you know that something's going to happen. The reason that this book stands out for me more than anything else is Kaladin ends up getting put into what's essentially like a slave camp, and they're all you get put into what they call Bridge 4, Four for Life. And he there's about 50 of them, and they kind of, when there's like a war, they carry this bridge between like the 50 of them, and they run with it, and then they have to put it over these like big gaps, and they climb over it. And there's about 13, 14 characters in Bridge 4, and I literally read this 10 years ago, and I can still name most of them. Melopen being the best one, Rock, what else was there? There's quite a few in there,
F,
Alex. Kef,
Scar.
and Scar, and every character you just kind of generally like. I would do anything to be in Bridge 4 in this book, anyway.
You got a
Um,
bit more into Bridge 4 than me, I think.
I got to Bridge 4 and the Lopen. You also get introduced to there's bigger characters alongside. So you get Adeline, and Shana. I think it was Shana, whatever her name is, Shalan. Guess the thing with this is the first book, and there's been 4, and everyone's been over 1,000 pages long. At the same time, you've got 15 other books in the Cosmere that are different series that all link into this. So to try and do this any justice in this, what I would say is the 4th book, Wisdom of War, which came out a couple of years ago, was an absolute atrocity
It's
to
dreadful.
fiction. Absolutely. And it feels like Brandon Sanderson's been told. I think, Alex, you said this, I'm stealing this off you, but you're absolutely right. He's basically so big now
Yep.
that he just editors, there's no editing. He just goes all in on one idea and just loses his way. But if you forget all that, this book is, it probably, if I'm being honest with you, when I read it, I probably came out thinking it's one of the best books I've ever read, and it probably still is. It's amazing. But the thing is, it's not accessible for anybody. If you read this book without having read anything else in Cosmere, you're missing out on like 20% of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge with some of these fantasy authors, especially Brandon Sanderson being the main one, is when their ideas are that big. It's kind of like the Marvel films, but a complex version of the Marvel films, where like so many things in there for the committed fan.
It's a hard start as well, isn't it?
It's
It's like the first 50 pages are like, what is going on?
The brilliant thing about it as well, I'm sorry, I'm taking up some time here really quickly. They've got like
Go for it.
illustrations in there of like
Oh,
things, characters and stuff like that. And it's all the way through. Like the world is so deep. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, The Way of Kings is an absolute monster. I think it's the smallest of the
That's
the
ridiculous.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's so,
Mm.
and it's the biggest paperback I've got. I suppose, yeah. So yeah, anyway, I don't know if you've got a Sanderson. I'm guessing you've got a different one, Alex. But yeah, Way of Kings is my 8th.
I'm glad that you've got that one, because I've gone for a different series for my one Sanderson allowance. So that'll
Sanderson allowance.
Sanderson allowance, yeah. It's like my EMA. Yeah, so you've gone for that.
That's a deep cut of a joke.
Yeah,
Alex.
yeah.
There's no need to drop that in there. You've just alienated whoever the audience is. You've alienated 99% of them with that.
You've also indirectly told them that your parents are divorced as well. No one cares.
And now I'm of a certain age, between 32 and 35, I think. Yeah, I'm glad that you got that one. I've gone for another one, and that'll bring in the scape of the Cosmere when we talk about a whole new series that I've plumped with. But yeah, great books, except for the last one, which was, well, everyone else seems to think it's great, but we're not massive fans of it. I think there's a small following of people who hate the Rhythm of War.
The 5th one comes out this year.
Well, I'll still read it. That's I'm still involved. But,
so I'm guessing if the 5th one came out, that he must have, this terrible book, number 4, must have still been commercially successful enough.
The reviews for it are crazy. They're like everyone loves it. I think I don't know. We both found it really challenging.
It's
Danny still hasn't finished it. He started reading it literally 3 years ago, and Danny's still reading it.
That's a bad way.
Got like 8 chapters left.
A word a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 4.5% on Goodreads, 4.5 stars even on Goodreads. And but then on the other hand, I gave it 1 star, and the review I put on has got like loads of likes. So most people hate it, but then there's a lot of people who love to hate it.
Yeah.
Right. So back to me for number 8. So continuing my exploration through the most generic fantasy writers of the last sort of 50 years, I've gone with a Terry Pratchett number.
Nice.
And my favorite, all-time favorite book by Terry Pratchett, and it was an easy decision. I've gone with a book called The Night Watch. I don't know if either of you have read.
Tom approves.
I don't know if you've read many Terry Pratchett, or if you've read this one. But it's a Sam
Not read
Vimes
that
novel.
one. I've read I've read a couple. I've not read that many. I think I read
Guards is the
Yeah,
first Sam Vimes one, I think. And
yeah, I've read that one.
this is by far and away, and I don't know what this says about me, but it's by far and away the darkest Terry Pratchett book in the Discworld series, by a long chalk. There's some pretty horrible things that happen. Because Sam Vimes, to give you some background, is the sort of like chief of police of the main city in Discworld, Ankh-Morpork. And this actually, and it sort of plays into what we've discussed earlier with time travel, because it's so it could be a sort of sci-fi slash fantasy novel, this one, because the main character does go back in time, and he goes back in time, and before this book happens, he's always referencing his old sergeant who learned all the trade off and all. This is a wise guy that took him from a fresh green sort of 16-year-old recruit and turned him into a halfway decent sort of cop. And then it turns out, and he goes back in time, and it turns out his mentor is himself. Basically,
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoilers in this, by the way. We're just getting a notification that we've got 10 minutes left, by the way. Yes, so yeah, big spoilers. But it's kind of left a bit open ended, because you're like, the way that, was it himself or was it an actual person then he inhabited for that particular loop? You know how sci-fi time travel stuff works. It's all a bit of a paradox. But yeah, basically there's this guy going around and he keeps stabbing people, which is not sort of normal setup for a Terry Pratchett Discworld novel. He's called Carter, and he was someone who, it was his one regret of his career, Sam Vimes, that he let him get away with when he was young, and then he's back on the scene, and then introduces the whole time loop thing, and it's just a lot of thing that opens up, and it's really quite complicated, but nicely explained, and everything comes up in a very good conclusion, and there's quite a lot of good action in it, and like I say, it's it's just really, three parts of it are just really nasty, but like gritty, like a gritty thriller. It sort of just abandons the rest of the vibe of Discworld for one book and just goes, I'm going to write a kind of really sort of gritty thriller that could be set in like Chicago or something, rather than the fake city that he's just made up, and like all the magic elements, which I think in Discworld are fairly low anyway. It's just the fact that it's a fictional scenario and the world isn't really on top of a big turtle, but there's like barely any, really none, and it's just basically a police sort of thriller, really. But
like a kind of noir kind of.
Yes, yeah, there's definitely an element to that, which is probably one of the reasons I like it, because I love that sort of stuff. And he's very sort of smoking on street corners, wearing the hat and stuff, and just a lot of noir stuff. If you basically write a noir book and set it in a loosely fantasy setting, I will read it. So
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Although I say that, I still haven't got through any of the things that Thomas
say there's literally there's some serious ones out there you've just completely pied. I've not read enough Pratchett. Do you know what? Weirdly enough, do you know what? I've read like 4 Pratchett books, but I've read Eric 5 times. I don't know why. I just love it.
I feel like there's loads better books than Eric out there.
I just love it. I've read it. I nearly put it in my list. I was like, you can't do that.
Fair enough.
I might need to get back into it.
Yeah, I would. I mean, my general experience, he's very funny and very sort of witty, but in my general experience, a lot of people think that their favourite books are in the sort of first 4 to 6. I think they're pretty bad, actually, and I think they got better as he went, and then there was a bit of a tail off towards the end. But like sort of 8 to 25 are all sort of very high quality. I didn't read any of the young adult ones, but the other stuff. But so that's my number 8, I think it was. So on to 7 we go. Do you think you can get this banged out in the time we've got before we have to change, Liam, or do you want to change now?
I think I can probably do this, because I talked about staying in my lane, and this is my number 7, right? This is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. Written in 1969. Obviously, Le Guin, a big fantasy author.
Yeah.
When I talk about staying in my lane, this is the 7th best sci-fi book I've ever read. I am not intelligent enough to articulate why. So my thoughts on the matter are just going to be super high level, and this will be a quick one. But in brief, Tom talked about the impact that his number 8 had, in terms of he can still think back to those characters after, I think you said 10 years, Tom, right?
Yeah,
And they're
about
still
that. Yeah.
so that vivid in your mind. I think the best books, and definitely every book on this list, I have like a snapshot that I can go back to. I can think. I know exactly where I was when I read The Left Hand of Darkness. I was actually in Scotland, and I read it on a holiday. Ironically, it was like the 1 week when Scotland had 28 degrees of raging, blazing sunshine. It was like a complete, it had never happened before, to the point where all these everyone we bumped into was like, you've picked the best time to come to to come and visit. And I read this book, which is all about this envoy on this alien planet called Gethen, which is known as Winter, which is this absolute frozen landscape. And I was reading it in this tropical Scotland at the time. The writing of Le Guin is so perfect, it's so beautiful, so evocative. Just her prose is just completely beyond my ability to explain why it's so good. But her writing is so good that even in that surrounding, where I was shorts and t-shirt and getting a suntan in Scotland, reading that story, I felt cold. I felt this frozen environment all around me. It just completely brought me into this world of Gethen. And the story itself is about a lot of things, but it's mostly just about two people who develop a friendship that may or may not cross the boundary from friendship into something else.
Sexy.
Into something sexy, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. But so it's not a complex story, but the way that it's written, the world that it paints is so it's just so vivid that it's stayed with me ever since. And there's some quirks that Le Guin throws in there, like Le Guin, big feminist and very anti-establishment, like Alex, before he decided to start working for the government. And the inhabitants of this world that this envoy is on are, I think the word is ambisexual. So they're neither male or female. They're basically sexually latent for most of the time. And once a month, they take on either male or female sexual characteristics.
I do this.
Exactly, yeah, don't we all? And that fundamentally shapes the way that this society works. And I just found it like brain bending trying to wrap my head around this society that Le Guin built around like a biology that's so different from our own. It still blows my mind thinking about it to this day. And you've got the big idea there, but then you've got this amazing relationship between these two characters. One is an envoy who's come to essentially on a diplomatic mission to the planet. The other is a politician who's there to help the envoy. And there's a section where the two of them have to trek across an ice field for like 80 days to try and reach safety and try and cross a border. And yeah, those were the chapters where I was just blown away. And in that moment, even though I was sat on a sun lounger somewhere in Edinburgh, I was right there. I was in that tent, in that freezing cold with this ambisexual alien creature. So yeah, it was amazing book, and I think it's a masterpiece. And I'm just not intelligent enough to explain why.
Fair enough. I didn't realise that Ursula Le Guin had actually written any sci-fi novels, so that's a new one for me. I didn't realise there were any
Earthsea ones to read. I've never read them, but now you've said that, I might give them a go.
I think Earthsea is kind of like YA, I think.
Yeah,
that's my impression.
Is it?
I could be wrong. But yeah, she wrote it's part of, they're called a Hainish cycle, which is basically she wrote some sci-fi based around this idea that humans were not born on the planet Earth. They were born on this planet called Hain, and they were like seeded across various planets in the galaxy. And her Hainish cycle explores those different planets. On each one, like on the world of Gethen, they have this ambisexuality. There's one called the Dispossessed, where they have this like broadly capitalist planet with a moon that's broadly anarchist, and there's it's just a political allegory. So yeah, she's wrote some amazing sci-fi, and this for me is top of that pile.
That's cool. That's interesting, because that's back to Tom's number 8. is sort of Russia and the Cosmere. It's like humans, they've sort of realized, again, spoilers, that they're not actually home to that planet, and a lot of the world building and stuff is around. This is a different planet. Imagine it as an actual science thing. You've got a planet that's slightly further away or closer to the Earth, and all what happens around it and evolutionary stuff, and then how does that affect their society? How does that affect their relationships and stuff like that? I think it's a really cool place to start.
I love that kind of world building.
To me.
It's you, Tom, with number
cool.
7.
My number 7 is Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin.
Nice.
Now, this is beautiful. It's 1,200 pages. Don't know if you guys know that. It's bigger than Stormlight. What'd you say?
What more needs to be said?
What did you say? I think
Yeah.
there's probably just a couple of things. I think I'm not going to comment on the book itself because for me it's the best of the series so far. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And it goes back to it's not finished, which is disappointing. I think George R. R. Martin is probably the best fantasy writer alive. Period. I think his writing, his prose, his everything. That's because I've read some of his non-fantasy as well. I've read some of his horror. I've read some of his sci-fi. I've read all the prequel series like the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, all of that sort of stuff. And he kind of brought this to the forefront, didn't he? So for me, point of view fantasy doesn't get a lot better than George R. R. Martin. The reason this isn't higher is one, because it's been 15 years since I read this, and I generally would be lying if I was like, yeah, this is because this was the first fantasy series I read. I actually read the first 3-4 books before reading anything else, so it seemed amazing at the time, and I'm sure it is. Secondly, this is the one where there's the big battle where Tyrion ends by crawling through and shooting an arrow at his dad, and that whole scene in book goes on for like 3 or 4 different preview chapters is just incredible. Because you get in obviously Tyrion from outside of city, you've got everyone inside the city, and it's fantastic. So don't really know what more to say about George R.R. and Storm of Swords, but I think that he's, if he finishes it, fantastic. Even if he doesn't, I think those first 5 books stand up. I think of the 5, this one is the king. I think it's absolutely brilliant for a ridiculously huge number of reasons.
So the only thing I can add to that is I recently had a period of gardening leave for starting the new job, and I watched the Game of Thrones TV show, and my God, like quality series 1 through 4, incredible when they're using George R. R. Martin's foundation or blueprint. Season 5, when they start to run out of book material, begins a slight decline. Season 6 falls off the edge of a cliff harder than, I think it was your number 8 you said, when he got to book 4 it just becomes terrible. Like once they ran out of that man's material, even though they had his, like, I guess, notes about where the story was going to go to, it just became absolutely terrible. And part of that might just be that the TV show collapsed under its own weight. But I read all 4. There is 4, right? Clash, Storm, Feast for Crows, Dance of Dragons, Game of Thrones. 5.
5. There's 5, yeah.
Yes, I read all 5. Probably like maybe 4 years ago, and I was blown away by them. The only thing is, like you say, will it ever be finished?
And I think as well, probably for me, I would be lying if I said I could separate the TV series and the books, because I can't. I'd need to reread the books, because for me, I can't remember where one starts and one ends. And just to be even sexier, the book has all of the different houses like engraved into it, so it is just amazing.
Well, that's why it's number 7.
This cost me 40 quid, and it's worth 400 quid now, so I have to be careful with it. I've never actually read it, and now I'm probably going to break it on camera.
Tom, that you're not. Yeah, there you go. You got it.
Oh, in the slot.
Well done. We've reached our first duplication, because I've got that further up my list, and I've got the exact same book, Storm of Swords. Yeah, I think it's the Red Wedding as well.
Yes,
of course it is. Yeah,
which is obviously the first
anything
time.
else to add to it?
Not really. I mean, I had to go back and sort of have a look on synopsis what happened where in terms of which book, and and then have to sort of plump for Storm of Swords. Yeah, the prose is fantastic. The action's great. The plot, which is always the main thing for me, what's going on in the grand scale of things. Have you got an idea of that, or is it going to get away without you? Like you say, we don't really know if he's going to tie it all up, or I mean, he's 75. He doesn't look that healthy. I don't I cast aspersions, but hopefully he's got some pretty detailed notes for Joe Abercrombie to finish it for him. I don't know, maybe we'll see. But
Where have you got it?
3.
3.
Yeah.
Spoilers. I'll just say as well that my lingering impression from reading the whole series, Song of Ice and Fire, is George R. R. Martin, a man who Alex just pointed out correctly, doesn't look in the best of health. He's obsessed with listing off the food that is served to these like big banquets. He's like, there'll be a whole paragraph of, and they had quail's eggs, and they had roasted duck, and they had bread with cheese. But I actually think that you can use that as a crude fat joke, but it adds loads to the color of this like medieval world, because like the Night's Watch guys literally eat rabbits or cheese and biscuits, and then in King's Landing they have these like obscene banquets where they eat all this ludicrous food, whilst most of the city, I think for majority of like book 3, 4, 5, King's Landing is like it's severe discontent and starvation, and like people people killing and cannibalizing people in the streets. Like I actually think that adds a hell of a lot to the world building.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to a reread at one point. I was hoping to need to do it for Winds of Winter.
I'm waiting for.
Yeah, it might just be something I do to commiserate myself that we're never going to get Winds of Winter.
It's either going to be Winds of Winter or he's dead. There's the only 2 reasons I'm going to reread them. I'm not doing it either way.
Weirdly, one may expedite. What's the real word for that? I don't know. But
Expedite.
Expedite. That's the one. I've added an I.
You're close enough.
Yeah, it's close enough. One might expedite the other in the fact that we might get one after he dies. They might just look through and go, yeah, publish what was left, or get an author to do what Sanderson did for Michael Jordan. I was about to say.
Yeah,
Michael Jordan's Wheel of Time.
Space Jam 4, the 1,000-page. Yeah, I do sincerely hope that, like, I'm pissed off at the TV show for the way that they dropped the ball so much, and they built so much in the books. I just hope that he gives a satisfying conclusion, particularly around the Long Night stuff. Like, because I think the TV show couldn't work with that material. It was too much.
Didn't know where to go. It didn't know where to go, did it?
So I hope George R. R. Martin is long lived, and it comes eventually, which is a sign of how good the books are. And
then George, questionable decisions creatively, artistically, strategically in the particularly last series. Like you say, it went off a cliff way before that, but I could barely see the last series. I had to sit in a dark room and have the brightness on my telly up to like 100, and I was like, I still don't know what's going on.
Was
that in your spare room?
Still baffles me.
That was in my toilet.
Was that in the cinema room, Alex?
I wish I had a cinema room. Yes, cool.
That's your 3. Okay, just so I remember.
Yeah, that's a quick one for me at 3. I can just go straight on. But right, it's me now, isn't it? Again, yes. On my number 7. Really just did stick. This is the middle part of a generic hat trick here for me. And I've gone, and you may again deride this, but I've gone for Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling, because I think that these stories are fantastic, and
I agree.
I know they're kids' books, aren't they? Well, they kind of grew with their audience. I think in the first 3 were basically kids' books. 3 kind of gets on to like suggest darker tones. 4, she sort of starts to realize her target audience are kind of in their teens, or at least starting it. And then it sort of finishes like any other book, really, but maybe with a slightly young adult feel to it. Which, and I listen. Yeah, I do listen. I listen on audiobooks, all the strike books by J.K. Rowling, and regardless of what you think of her as a person, she is one hell of a writer. I just absolutely destroy her prose. Like if I'm listening to or something by her, it's gone in about 2 or 3 days. Which, as Tom will attest to, is not the same across all different fantasy books. So sometimes it takes me a good couple of months to get through something, which is just an indication of how much you enjoy reading it, isn't it? But yeah, I've gone for the 6th book because I think that's kind of, other than Prisoner of Azkaban, which I think is quite good, it also has a time travel element to that, Prisoner of Azkaban. Yeah. 6 is kind of where she's got that idea, I think. Some things were obviously retconned as she went through, but I think by 6, probably by 5, she has an idea of where this story is now going. She knows kind of what she's going to do with Dumbledore and Snape and all that stuff. And I just think it's one of those books series that's so popular that almost underrated by the purists. And I just think it's really good. And I rewatched the, speaking of like other media, I watched the films the other week in a kind of about a 1 week period. Me and Ellie just blitzed them. And obviously they're quite faithful to the stories as well, but they're just really entertaining. And I think 7 kind of has to wrap it all up, so it does that kind of satisfactorily, I think. But 6, I think, is just my favorite because you just get a bit more of an insight into Snape, and I think of all the characters, Snape's probably my favorite, so that's why I went with number 6.
What's your favorite one, Neil? Have you read them now?
I've read them all, yeah. I would say I was always a fan of Goblet of Fire, just because it represents like the transition from, like Alex suggested, the first 3 particularly feel very not even YA, like
the kids' books or
children's books. Yeah, I think my dad bought me a copy of Philosopher's Stone when I was, I don't know, it must have been like 10 or 11 or something. I can't remember exactly.
We were the same age as Harry. I think we were the same age.
Yeah, I mean, fucking hell. Imagine wearing glasses and having a scar on your forehead going to school at the age of 11, which I consequently did have. That was, but yeah, I like Goblet of Fire. I love the books, but as I get older, I do find some of the world building a bit ridiculous. Like the fact that, if I was a head teacher of a school and there's the heroic Griffin house. There's the there's the birdhouse, and then there's the whatever Hufflepuff is.
Rat, I think. Also got a badger.
Then there's the expressively evil house full of evil people with evil names and evil histories. I'd just be like, I'll close that house down. I love the idea that throughout the whole history they've just been like, yeah, we should let those evil guys in. That seems reasonable.
The racist house.
But it's a story, right? It has to have an antagonist. And yeah, I think if you live in the UK, you can't go through a Christmas period without, you flick onto ITV1, and I think they pretty much show all 7 films back to back, and then they just loop them. And it never fails to catch my attention.
I think Sky develops a channel sometimes. They just call it Sky Sports and Harry Potter. Which is a bit much, but
do you say Sky Sports Harry Potter?
Yeah, I think I said so. That's how closely they are linked.
Alan Tildesley is commenting on Harry's form on the Quidditch World Cup.
Is Alan Tildesley a portmanteau of Clive Tildesley and Alan Shearer?
Yeah, I think you're right. There.
Commentary pedantry aside, I accept there's a lot of things wrong with it, but I just overlook it because I like it so much. But yeah, that is my number 7. 6. No, 6. So you must be on. No, 7. 7. Sorry, yeah. So you're on number 6.
I am, yes.
Cool.
So my number 6, we already talked about it briefly earlier. The oldest book on my list, and a book that I have a copy of, but I don't know where it is. I could find all 9 others, but I don't know where my copy of Brave New World is, by Aldous Huxley. Book that needs literally no introduction. So when I was thinking about these stories, I was like, I felt duty bound to include at least one of the big dystopian novels. So you've got 1984,
Fahrenheit 451.
Fahrenheit 451.
I reckon you go 1984. Oh, all right, fair enough. Yeah.
So Brave New World gets my vote, and maybe this is controversial, but I think Fahrenheit 451 is a bit ridiculous. Like I find it just I can't believe in the dystopia.
Well, you don't believe people come in with a fire hose and set fire to the contents of your house for seemingly no reason?
Yeah, exactly that, right? 1984, I like, but I think for me, I've always found dystopias difficult, and maybe this is because like when we were growing up, we seem to go through a phase in like the maybe like mid 2000s to definitely into the 2010s where there was just a dystopia around every corner, like Hunger Games and all those kind of like young adult dystopias.
Yeah.
They just were ubiquitous, and most of them can never hold their own weight. So you think about any system, and you and the way my brain works is I always think, well, how would that actually work in practicality? And it would probably just collapse in on themselves. And I think 1984 is predicated on this idea that you control a society, it's absolute totalitarianism, you rule by fear, you make the kind of lower classes subservient, and then the intelligentsia and the academia of the society you rigidly control through totalitarianism. Any society built around that foundation it's too precarious. It would just, in my opinion, collapse in on itself, right? So I picked Brave New World because I love the fact that Aldous Huxley posits a future where we just sleepwalk into dystopia, where we're not oppressed into being part of this dystopic society. Instead, we're led and willingly follow into this system that is based around eugenics first and foremost. Like this book was written in the 30s when eugenics was a legitimate movement. I remember like the idea that you selectively breed people and you have the alpha to epsilon system, and like the breeding program, like humans aren't born anymore, they're bred like ex utero. I love that world building, and I also love the fact that it's not like a dystopia that's just generically evil, because they still let people that want to live in the kind of traditional way of pre that society. It's a world state, isn't it? They still let people live in those reserves, which is where we meet the savage, who eventually becomes like that fish out of water character, who I guess exposes a lot of the problems within the world state. And yeah, this for me it's the kind of dystopia that feels like it could happen. I think Aldous Huxley was warning against a technological dystopia, and against the placation, like we talked about earlier, of if you placate people with what they need, whether that's sex or food or whatever, or soma, right? Then you can be conduced into almost anything.
So, alcohol and fags, weed, and I think to a certain extent it's that I think I love Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and stuff. I think he was right. I think that I think to a certain extent, just to play devil's advocate, they may have both been right in the sense that I think elements of sort of China, North Korea, you could argue, it's so authoritarian. There's bits of Orwellian nightmares in that, and how they control look at COVID and basically what happened to the people who had any idea what was going on, and they've died mysteriously. And you kind of I wonder what happened to them. So I think they're kind of both right to a certain extent, whereas Aldous Huxley kind of predicted what Western society would end up looking like. I think pretty well, if you actually take out the fact that we're not doing verbatim all the things that were happening in Brave New World. If you take the spirit of what he was saying, I think we pretty much have wandered into the thing where I think there's another great quote from someone who was doing a comparison of the two authors of I think that Orwell would be worried that any kind of information would be suppressed to the point where no one could sort of read it and understand it. Whereas Aldous Huxley, something like there'd be so much information off and literally no one would care.
Yeah.
And I go, well, that's definitely happened. We've got the entire internet at our fingertips, and people more care about, what's going on in the jungle or whatever reality TV show is happening at the time. And we're all guilty of it. I'm not sort of using the internet solely for intellectual purposes. Just 98% of the time. But yeah, no, great shout. And I'm not sure if I've actually sat down and read it or I've just read essays about it.
If you haven't read it, you absolutely must, Alex. It's not a long book, but it's absolutely fantastic, and it deserves its place in that pantheon of the big three.
Yeah, and I think I would. Well, again, I'd have to probably go read them all cover to cover. But I think from what I know about each one, I think I agree with you that Brave New World would be my favorite. Did you watch the TV series that's I think Sky put together a couple of years back?
I have no interest in the TV series of Brave New World, so I didn't watch it. I would watch it but I don't know. Did you?
I did. Yeah, I thought let's see how wrong they get this, and I did actually watch it to the end, and then I again Googled it and spent four hours looking at what people had read, and some things they changed I think to make it a bit more palatable. Like Brave New World, again, spoilers, ends quite depressingly again, doesn't it? Like it's quite bleak, and they sort of cut that bit off. They sort of gave him the savage kind of character arc. But I like quite a lot of the actors in it. It was pretty stylish. They obviously had quite a high budget. They sort of made it a bit of more of a murder mystery than I think is in the actual book, where when they start to uncover this perhaps some cracks in the perfect civilization they've built, because no one's supposed to commit crime and all that stuff. But yeah, I watched it all, so yeah, it was okay. 6 out of 10.
Stunning review.
Great review.
Yeah.
That's my number 6, Brave New World. Absolute classic for a reason.
Indeed. Tom.
My number 6 is Ruined by John Gwynne.
Boo.
You got that as well?
No. Is Ruin good?
Ruined John Gwynne?
Yeah, Ruin's good, isn't it? I didn't like the second series.
Yeah, so John Gwynne.
I feel like I've rocked you now.
I just you loved this series, so when you booed it,
yeah, no,
sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I did like the series. Carry on.
So it's book 3 of The Faithful and the Fallen. When you start to read a lot of fantasy, you realise there's a lot of swords and weapons on the front of most of the books.
Yeah.
The stories aren't all exactly the same, but maybe they're more similar than you realise the more you read them. There's a few bits to this one that for me it goes back to the characters. So there's 14 point of view characters in this book.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's quite a lot. And it's built off. Obviously, you've got probably one of the only fantasy book where I think gods have done right. So there is a god element to it. You've got your normal. You've got Corbin, who is prophesized to be sort of the the normal fantasy thing is going to be like king of the world. There's a character in the book called Macwin, who has what I can only describe as sort of arc. Is imagine if like Gladiator was 10 times better than it already is, and you put it in a book called Ruin, and Macwin was the Gladiator. That's what happens. It's fucking amazing. His arc is incredible in this book. He goes to get he ends up basically being a gladiator. It really made me. I didn't really cry, but it's pretty sad what happens to him. We get a lot of questions answered around some of the more minor characters, and it builds up amazingly for the final book of the series. I think for me, John Gwynne, when he wrote the subsequent series that Alex doesn't like as much, he sort of went more action heavy. This one was very character driven. It's not doing anything new. It's not, this is Lord of the Rings in 2015, like with a modern twist in it. But I think for character building and for setting up a final book of the series, it was one of the best books, fantasy books that I think I've ever read. And I would recommend the whole series. So yeah, again, not a lot of detail because the problem with these books is when you're reading a 4-book series and they're all like 600 pages, you're struggling a little bit with what actually happens. But this one left me with that feeling of I've read something absolutely incredible here, really, really special. So yeah, I would put Ruin right up there. It's the best John Gwynne book. Probably the best fantasy book outside of the big guns I think that I've ever read. So yeah, John Gwynne. Can't believe you booed him, you twat.
The book I was thinking of when I said at the start, I find some action sequences just pure tedious. Was the new series by John Gwynne?
Rich.
Yeah, oh yeah, and they shout truth and courage a lot, which I think is just it's the lamest thing. One of the lamest things I've ever read.
I'm
But
sorry, but this is the author as well. I don't know if you can see that, Liam, but that's what he actually looks like, which makes him even more of a lad because he literally looks like he's quite of a
He looks like my character in like Skyrim, basically.
yeah, he's an absolute geezer.
Doesn't he role play Viking battles or something, or a reenactment kind of guy, that sort of thing? But one good thing for the series, I would say, is that one of the best examples of a character who considers themselves to be good, has the makings of being good, but through things that don't even he's never sort of just intrinsically evil, just the odd bit of weakness, the odd bit of self doubt, the odd bit of arrogance, and that just compounds and compounds and compounds, and by the end he's like the main villain. He doesn't start as a villain, he starts as like a good guy. And I thought that was a really nice way to do it, rather than just some of the weaknesses of fantasy tropes in general. Is you've got good, you've got evil, they come together, good wins. It was like you've got people with slightly opposing views, they come together, by the end of the story one of them is an absolute twat and the other one is sort of all right.
I like the way you paused there to think of the word and you chose nice.
yeah. You know why I had to pause? Because the first word that came to my mind was neat.
That is really neat.
Yeah.
I realized.
Yeah. I thought
The word neat should never be the first word.
Yeah, well, I'm not American. Why would I think neat?
Super neat.
Super neat, Milks.
But yeah, no, that's a fair. I think they'd probably get my honourable mentions.
It's neat.
Right, number 6. Again, a big sort of one of the genre. Doesn't need much introduction. The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. And
very good things about that.
Yeah, it's an up and coming author.
Can you give me a quick synopsis?
People want to destroy Ring. They destroy Ring, and Frodo and Sam do some things which, let's face it, anyone who's read the books finds very tedious most of the time.
Yep.
And then everyone spends their time wishing we go back to Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas being legends across Middle-earth. And occasionally we do get that, and then Gandalf sort of goes away, turns up again. And again, this is the longest in terms of the last time I read this. Although actually, arguably Pullman would have been longer, but it's got to be at least 16, 17 years since I read this. I did reread the first half of Fellowship of the Ring when I was going to New Zealand, because I just wanted to immerse myself in everything New Zealand. But I got to the Tom Bombadil bits and just checked out. I was like, can you do a limited reread where you just skip whole chapters if you want, just to sort of still read it but preserve your sanity? I don't know. Maybe I'll reread it properly one day. But
what out of interest, Alex? Why Return of the King? Was it no Tom Bombadil, presumably?
No Tom Bombadil, so it had to be either 2 or 3 for me, because I think that's really the first one is surprisingly Tom Bombadil heavy. I think it's quite a big section, which I think if you're going for sort of minimal details, that's quite a big thing why it wouldn't be Fellowship. And because I think all of my reasons why I like Two Towers actually now comes from the film rather than the books.
That's fine.
I'm not saying it's a bad book. I just think, Helm's Deep's the second one if I was thinking about the films. But again, like we said earlier, Helm's Deep is like they take pages. They take 4 hours to get there, 2 pages, and then 4 hours how everyone feels about how the battle went down.
My overwhelming memory of reading Lord of the Rings is being at an age where I'd get to the chapter or get to a part of a chapter where Aragorn sings a song about flowers for like 3 pages. And I would just fucking switch off.
Yeah, no, everyone does. Everyone, you've got to switch the songs. I think you can be forgiven for that. Just what I was going to say. Yeah, you sing them, making your own tunes for them.
I'm in a Tom Bombadil cover band.
Sure, there's plenty of those out there. It's one of the few books, and I think probably had this with the Philip Pullman one as well. That I, by the end of it, probably because I was still like quite young as well, I quite wanted to be in the world. Maybe just as a guy from Rohan or Gondor or something. But yeah, it's just that expansive. It's that great sort of world building. Nothing too much is going on in terms of the plot because he pretty much created fantasy. So it's it's trope heavy because he wrote the tropes.
I don't think you can overstate just how like the impact that Lord of the Rings had. Like that whole like men, elves, dwarves trifecta would never have existed were it not for Tolkien. And I had this conversation with someone the other day. If you gave me a pen and a piece of paper, I could draw Middle Earth, and the map would be, I think, about 70% accurate. Because I'd start with that ring of mountains around Mordor. I could work everything out.
Work your way up the Misty Mountains.
And like, if you asked me to point to Burundi on a map, I'd be like, "What the fuck?" I'd have no idea. But I could draw a fantasy map.
Yeah.
Probably from 15 years ago after reading it from memory with absolutely no problem. And I think that's testament to how much how important of a book it is.
Yeah, but Middle Earth, which age? Do you want Beleriand in it, or do you want Numenor in it? Or...
Fuck off.
Post Numenor thinking. Yeah. No, yeah, it's fantastic. But I think there's a lot of stuff. I remember it finishing, and probably one of the reasons I've gone for Return of the King is because it's got quite a lengthy epilogue, and I don't mind that because sometimes things finish in a big climax, and it's kind of then I'm just sort of in an anticlimax, just sitting having read the book. I quite want to know what's happened to the characters, and arguably it goes a little bit too far the other way. But I like to know don't just kill off these characters or stop these characters for me. I'd like to know that Gimli and Legolas spent their time holidaying around Gondor for a bit before retiring. And all that sort of stuff. So yeah, obviously, fantastic series. One day I'll read it again. Yeah, I'm in my spare room. Hence the giant clock map. It's 2-bedroom house.
There's no need to tell us it's a spare room, Alex. That's
I could say fucking hell.
Unnecessary.
I'll be in the East Wing next time.
The orangery. So whatever's been recorded up to this point, Alex, just fucking burn it and then
yeah. I'll edit into a tight 30 seconds of fun. Maybe not.
30 seconds of fun, which is something my girlfriend is very familiar with.
Call the podcast it. And if anyone needs a piss or a drink, obviously just go for it, and I can edit around it.
Thanks.
No worries.
I was planning on just shitting myself here.
I didn't know how dedicated you were going to be.
I wasn't even going to drink. I was just going to focus.